The galaxy was dying. It was a truth felt not in the cold calculus of astromancers or the frantic whispers of inquisitors, but in the very marrow of its countless human souls. A slow, grinding death that had stretched across 100 centuries, a poison that had long since reached the heart. The final year of the 41st millennium was not an end, but the agonal spasm of a corpse that refused to lie still. An empire of 1,000,000 worlds was shuddering apart, its sinews of warp travel and astropathic communication snapping one by one under a strain it was never built to endure. From the galactic east, the Great Devourer, the endless shadow of the tyrannid hive fleets, consumed star systems with a terrifying biological efficiency. Worlds that had stood for millennia vanished in a storm of chitin and teeth, their biomass rendered down to fuel the inexorable advance. In the Damocles Gulf, the upstart Toe Empire, young and vibrant, pushed its philosophy of the greater good. With plasma rifles and sophisticated battlesuits, its ideological poison spreading faster than its armies. Ancient metallic tombs stirred across the galaxy as Necron dynasties silent for 60 million years awoke to reclaim their long-lost dominion, their Gauss flayers stripping flesh from bone with cold, passionless light. But these were known threats, ancient terrors that the Imperium in its vast and blundering way had learned to fight. The true damnation came from within. It was a cancer of the soul, a rot that had festered for 10,000 years, and it had finally burst its bonds. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, was a galactic scream made manifest. Tearing across the length of the Segmentum Obscurus to the Segmentum Pacificus, it was a wound in reality itself, a bleeding fissure from which the raw, untamed energies of the warp poured into the materium. It split the Imperium in two. On one side, Terra the Throne World still shone its psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, a flickering candle in a hurricane. On the other, in the darkness of Imperium, Nihilus, there was nothing. No light, no guidance, no hope. Just 1 trillion souls cut adrift in a sea of monsters, their prayers lost in the roaring static of a godless night. Demonic legions of a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy tore through the veil, turning bastion worlds into playgrounds for the ruinous powers. And then Cadia fell. It was more than the loss of a fortress world. It was more than a strategic catastrophe. Cadia was a symbol. For 10,000 years it had stood as the unbreachable gate, the bulwark against the eye of terror. Its Kazakin had been the wardens of damnation, its pylons, the steadying hand against the storm. The rallying cry Cadia stands had echoed in the hearts of Imperial guardsmen on 1,000 battlefields. But now Cadia did not stand. It was shattered, its fragments scattered into the void by the vengeful hand of Abaddon the Despoiler and the full unleashed might of the Black Legion. The news spread not as a military report, but as a psychic shockwave of despair. If Cadia could fall, what hope was there for any world the fortress had been breached? The lock was broken. The wolves were inside the fold. Hope became a currency more precious and rarer than adamantium. For most, it ceased to exist entirely. Despair was a suffocating blanket, smothering the final embers of defiance. It was in this age of absolute suffocating darkness that a miracle occurred. Or perhaps a blasphemy. On Macragge, the pristine heart of the Ultramarines' realm of Ultramar, a demigod stirred. For 10 millennia, the body of Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Theathath Legion, had sat enthroned in the Temple of Correction, a figure of myth preserved in the stasis field that held him at the very edge of death, a poisoned wound from his traitor brother Fulgrim, forever fresh. He was a relic, a saint of a bygone era, a reminder of a time when giants walked among men. The event of his reawakening was not the stuff of prophecy. There was no celestial choir, no divine intervention heralded by the ecclesiarchy. It was a desperate, sacrilegious gambit. It was the arcane technological genius of the Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, a tech priest of questionable orthodoxy, who had worked on a secret project for 10,000 years. It was the strange alien power of Ivrain, emissary of the nascent Eldari god of the dead Inead. A fusion of forbidden science and Xenos sorcery. Inside the stasis field, time had not passed. For Guilliman, one moment he was dueling Fulgrim upon the steps of the Temple of Hera, the traitor's poisoned blade biting deep into his neck. The next, a torrent of sensation, a universe of agony and information crashed into his consciousness. The stasis field failed. The ancient armor groaned. He felt the shriek of dying machinery and the whisper of alien souls. He felt the thrum of a new artificial heartbeat within his chest as Cowl's masterwork, the armor of fate, pumped life-giving energies through his veins, counteracting the ancient venom. He opened his eyes. The faces that stared back at him were not the proud sons of Ultramar he knew. They were gaunt, haunted figures, their eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of awe, disbelief, and fear. The air was thick with the scent of incense and sacred oils, not the clean, sterile air of a Primarch's flagship. The hymns they chanted were in a debased Gothic tongue, prayers to a god he had never worshipped. His father. The weight of 10,000 years of decay, of ignorance, of fanaticism, fell upon him in a single crushing instant. He was a relic brought back to life, a creature of logic and reason, awakened in an age of madness and faith. He was a strategist, an administrator, a builder of empires, from an age of enlightenment, now standing in the ruins of a sprawling, superstitious theocracy that worshipped his father as a deity, and his own words as scripture they no longer understood. Could his skills honed in the clear light of the Great Crusade even apply here? Could a single man, even a Primarch, hope to mend a vessel so thoroughly rotted from within? The Imperium was not merely besieged from without. It was a monster that was consuming itself, a bureaucratic religious leviathan of dogma and corruption. Roboute Guilliman was alive. But as he looked upon the terrified, worshipping faces of his descendants and felt the psychic scream of a galaxy tearing itself apart, he had to wonder if he had been resurrected only to preside over the final agonizing death of everything he had ever fought to build. The question was not whether he could win battles, but whether he could save the Imperium from itself. The journey to the heart of the Imperium was a pilgrimage through a gallery of grotesques. Guilliman had traveled from Macraga aboard the Macraga's Honor, a vessel he knew, yet it felt alien. The bridge was no longer a clean theater of command and logic. It was a shrine cluttered with reliquaries and purity seals. Servitors lobotomized and wretched performed tasks once given to proud legionaries. The crew moved with a bowed reverence, their whispers of prayer, a constant unnerving hum beneath the thrum of the plasma drives. Every gaze upon him was not that of a soldier to a general, but a penitent to a living saint. He felt less like a commander and more like a caged idol being paraded through the streets of his own crumbling creation. But nothing could have prepared him for terror. As his lander descended through the smog-choked ochre skies, he saw not the world he remembered, the seat of his father's grand design, but a monstrous planet-wide hive. Every mountain had been leveled, every ocean boiled away and built over. An endless Gothic cityscape, clawed at the polluted heavens, a testament to 10 millennia of desperate, unplanned construction. It was a monument to humanity's fear, a fortress built of bone steel and blind faith. He stepped out onto the landing platform of the Lion's Gate spaceport, and the sheer sensory assault buckled his Primarch constitution. The air was a rancid cocktail of industrial effluence recycled biologica, and the cloying sweetness of incense burned by the trillion. The sound was a physical blow, the distant, unending clang of manufactorums, the shuffling, murmuring tide of countless billions of pilgrims, and the omnipresent, deafening chant of ecclesiarchal choirs, broadcast from speakers the size of battle tanks. He saw poverty and squalor on a scale that defied comprehension, teeming masses of humanity living and dying in the shadows of continent-spanning cathedrals, erected in his father's name. This was not the cradle of humanity. It was its tomb. A cold, profound sense of alienation settled in his heart. He was home, and he had never felt more like a stranger. His confrontation with the High Lords of Terror did little to assuage that feeling. They gathered in the Sanctum Imperialis, a chamber so vast and ornate, it seemed to mock the very notion of efficient governance. 12 figures draped in the ostentatious regalia of their offices sat on thrones of obsidian and gold, their faces masks of political cunning paranoia and deep-seated arrogance. He saw the master of the administratum, a man whose corpulent form seemed sustained by paperwork alone, his eyes lost in a fog of bureaucratic minutiae. He saw the fabricator general of Mars, more machine than man, his voice a distorted cant of binary, his loyalty clearly to his own anachronistic creed, not the Imperium. The Lord Commander Militant, the inquisitorial representative, the paternoval envoy of the navigators, they were all the same. They were not pillars of the Imperium. They were parasites clinging to the rotting corpse, jealously guarding their own slivers of power. Guilliman stood before them, a giant of a forgotten age, his armor of fate, a gleaming beacon of functionality in a room dedicated to decadent form. He did not sit. The Imperium is bisected. He began, his voice calm, resonant, cutting through the perfumed air. Our enemies encircle us. Our logistics are shattered. Cadia has fallen. I have returned to rectify this. I will assume the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. You will grant me your full unconditional support. The response was not an acclamation of loyalty, but a wave of carefully worded obstructions. The master of the administratum spoke of the quadrillions of necessary permissions and tithe adjustments. The fabricator general questioned the sacred provenance of the technologies that had revived him. The inquisitorial representative spoke in veiled threats, murmuring of unforeseen influences and the dangers of radical, untested authority. They spoke for an hour, their arguments a labyrinth of tradition, protocol, and self-interest. They did not see a savior. They saw a threat to their ancient, comfortable stasis. Guilliman felt a cold fury rise within him, a contempt so profound it was almost physically painful. He realized then that he would not be leading a council of allies. He would be taming a nest of vipers. He needed them, their ancient authority, their control over the vast, creaking machinery of the Imperium. But he would never trust them. The final trial, however, was the most personal and the most devastating. He sought the one place he believed he might find an answer, a shred of the past he understood. He dismissed his guards, even the custodes, who watched him with their silent, unnerving vigilance. He walked alone through the final gates of the sanctum into the chamber of the Golden Throne. The cold was absolute, a dead cold that leached the warmth from his transhuman physiology. The air hummed with a power that felt like a scream held on the edge of sound for 10,000 years. And he saw him. Not his father, the Emperor, the radiant being of reason and power he had known. He saw a skeleton, a desiccated, withered thing lost within a web of arcane machinery and shimmering psychic energies. Cables and tubes like metallic vines snaked from the throne into the husk's skull and torso. Its face was a death mask, its eye sockets dark, empty voids. This was not a man. It was the nexus of a psychic vortex, the dying heart of a terrible engine. Guilliman knelt. He reached out with his mind, trying to find the consciousness the father he had loved and followed. "Father," he whispered into the crushing silence. "It is I. Roboute, I have returned. What would you have me do?" There was no answer. Not in words. What he felt was not the mind of a loving father, nor even a stern monarch. It was a psychic tempest, a maelstrom of raw, unbridled power. He felt flashes of pure, cold calculation, vast strategic imperatives on a cosmic scale, and a burning, hateful rage directed at the demons of the warp. But there was no personality, no recognition, no flicker of the man who had once walked the stars. There was only the will to endure the command to survive the psychic shriek of a weapon that would sacrifice anything and everything to keep fighting. The Emperor was gone. Only a psychic god weapon remained, a merciless alien intelligence wearing his father's corpse. In that ghastly silent throne room, Roboute Guilliman finally understood the truth. He was utterly and completely alone. The father he came to serve was dead, and the god that had taken his place was a power he could only wield, never commune with. The weight of saving humanity now rested on his shoulders, and his alone. To wage war in a dying galaxy required a new kind of weapon. Hope was an abstract, a useful tool for morale, but it could not blunt a chain axe or pierce a Xenos' hide. Guilliman the eternal pragmatist knew this. In the cold solitude of his new command, adrift in a sea of sycophants and relics, he began the work he understood best: logistics strategy and the marshalling of force. His first act was to summon the architect of his resurrection, the Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Kaul. The meeting took place not in the gilded halls of the Imperial Palace, but aboard Kaul's personal Arch Mechanicus, the Tsar Kesaita. The vessel was a heresy in itself, a mobile forge laboratory that hummed with technologies Guilliman had not seen since the Dark Age. Here, innovation was not a sin to be punished, but a creed to be pursued with relentless, immoral fervor. Kaul awaited him in his primary sanctum, a cavernous chamber where colossal stasis vats glowed with an eerie blue light. The Archmagos was a monument to extreme augmentation, a 12-foot-tall amalgamation of mechadendrites, whirring sensor arrays, and crimson robes, his original human form, a distant biological memory. Lord Primarch the Archmagos' voice crackled 1,000 synthesized tones, speaking in perfect concert. An honor. A predictable, yet statistically significant honor. You have come with questions. My purpose is to provide answers. It is my primary function, after all. That and invention. Guilliman dispensed with pleasantries. You revived me, Archmagos. You used Xenos arts to do so. A fact my new colleagues in the Inquisition will surely find fascinating. Now I find your name attached to a secret undertaking of galactic scope. Explain the Primaris project. Kaul's metallic form seemed to gesture with something akin to pride. It is not my project, Lord Guilliman. It is yours. Or rather, it is the fulfillment of your final command before the unfortunate incident at the Temple of Hera. You, or a being with your supreme authority, foresaw the long decline. You understood that the Adeptus Astartes, for all their glory, were a finite design for a finite war. The Great Crusade is over. A new, more terrible war has begun. It requires a new warrior. He gestured to the glowing vats. Inside each a giant slept, floating in amniotic fluid. They were Astartes, but larger, broader of shoulder, denser of muscle. Behold call intoned. The Primaris Space Marine. 10,000 years of labor. My life's great work. I have reinforced the existing genetic architecture. I have added 3 new implants, the sinew coils, the Magnificat, the Belisarian furnace. They are stronger, faster, more resilient. Their gene seed is incorruptible, engineered from the purest samples taken from your brothers at the dawn of the Imperium. I have corrected the flaws that led to the mutations of the Blood Angels and the Wolfen of Fenris. They are in every measurable way superior. Guilliman walked the length of the silent, sleeping army, his face an unreadable mask. Superior. The word was both a promise and a profanity. You have tampered with the Emperor's work. He said, his voice dangerously low. You have taken it upon yourself to improve the design of a Primarch's sons. The hubris, the sheer unmitigated heresy of it, Kaul. Heresy is a word used by the fearful to control the ignorant, Kaul retorted, a hint of electronic annoyance in his tone. The Emperor is the ultimate scientist. He would appreciate an improvement upon his original design. He built for a specific purpose. That purpose has changed. The galaxy is not the same. Your old warriors, noble as they are dying out. Their gene seed has been replicated 10,000 times too many. They are a fading echo. These, he gestured again, are a clear voice in the storm. I have 500,000 of them ready for deployment, their minds imprinted with tactical knowledge but awaiting a commander. Awaiting you. Guilliman stopped before one vat. The warrior within was the image of a classical hero, his face serene in slumber. He saw the potential. He saw the army he desperately needed. An army untouched by 10 millennia of decay and dogma. But he also saw a schism waiting to happen. To unleash these warriors would be to declare the original Astartes obsolete. It would be an insult to the memory of every hero who had died in the Emperor's name for 100 centuries. Yet what was the alternative? To fight the tide of damnation with a broken sword, to honor the past while sacrificing the future. His brief, horrifying communion with the entity on the Golden Throne had taught him one thing. Survival was the only creed that mattered. Logic, cold and brutal, asserted itself. The Imperium does not have the luxury of tradition, Guilliman stated, turning to face the Archmagos. His choice was made. It requires a sharper sword. I will accept this gift, Carl. But be warned, I will be watching you. Every schematic, every calculation will be scrutinized. Your genius will be chained to the needs of the Imperium, not your own curiosity. Now prepare your new legions. Their crusade begins at once. His speech to the assembled might of the Imperium on Terra was a moment that would pass into legend. From a vast rostrum overlooking the Emperor's ascent, he addressed millions of Imperial Guardsmen, Solar Auxilia chapter fleets, and Mechanicus cohorts. They were a sea of exhausted, grim-faced soldiers, the survivors of the fall of Cadia, and 100 other defeats. Despair hung over them like a shroud. Guilliman's voice, amplified to a godlike boom, cut through the gloom. Sons and daughters of the Imperium, for 10,000 years you have been told that your duty is to die. You have been told that your purpose is to hold the line. You have been told that the age of man is in its twilight, a long drawn-out defeat against the dying of the light. This was a lie born of fear and stagnation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I am Roboute Guilliman, son of the Emperor. And I tell you this, the age of man is not over. The Great Crusade is not a memory, it is a promise yet to be fulfilled. We have cowered in the dark for too long, praying for deliverance while our enemies feast upon our worlds. No more today we do not defend. We attack today, we do not hold the line. We advance. A new crusade is born this day. The Indomitus Crusade. We will carry the Emperor's light back into the darkness. We will reclaim what was stolen from us. We will remind the galaxy of the price of defying humanity. As he spoke, the first formations of Primaris Marines marched into the plaza, their brand new Mark X Tacticus armor gleaming, their bolt rifles held with perfect discipline. A gasp went through the assembly. They were Space Marines, but greater an embodiment of the strength Guilliman promised. For the first time in centuries, a genuine roaring cheer erupted from the heart of the Imperium, a wave of hope washing over the assembled armies. But this hope was not universally shared. On the bridge of the Ultramarines' battle barge Spear of Macragge, Captain Sicarius watched the broadcast, a rare, true smile on his face. This was vindication. This was rebirth. Yet far away in the swirling vortex of the Eye of Terror, the reaction was different. Aboard the Crusade Fortress Monastery, Eternal Crusader High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars watched the same broadcast. His ancient scarred face was granite. He looked at his Reclusiarch, whose skull helm betrayed no emotion. The High Marshal's gauntleted hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. New warriors, created by a machine worshipper of dubious faith. Warriors without history, without the long vigil of crusades to temper their souls. He did not see saviors. He saw a potential dilution of their sacred purpose, an insult to the generations of Templars who had died upholding their vows. The seeds of division sown in a laboratory on Mars 10,000 years ago had finally begun to sprout. The Indomitus Crusade was unleashed upon the wounded galaxy, not as a wave, but as a thunderbolt. Organized into 10 distinct crusade fleets, each a self-contained engine of war, it struck with a speed and coordinated fury the Imperium had not seen in millennia. For the first time since the great scouring, humanity was not merely holding on, it was striking back. The age of defeat was over. The age of vengeance had begun. The initial results were nothing short of miraculous. On the hive world of Gathalamor, which had been teetering on the brink of a massive Kornate uprising, Primaris intercessors executed a flawless grav-shoot insertion into the heart of the Spire of Blades. Their disciplined volleys of bolt rifle fire were a scythe in the face of the frenzied, screaming cultist hordes. Where older Astartes squads might have been overwhelmed by sheer numbers, the Primaris held their ground, their enhanced physiology and superior Mark X armor allowing them to weather the storm before pressing a relentless, methodical advance that decapitated the rebellion's leadership in a single solar day. In the Morphean sector, long cut off by roiling warp storms, the battlefleet Nemesis, led by Guilliman himself, shattered a fleet of red corsairs that had been preying upon the isolated worlds. The Primarch's strategic acumen, honed over centuries of campaigning, seemed almost precognitive to the naval officers of the 41st Millennium. He rewrote entire doctrines of void warfare on the fly, using the new, faster cruisers and the raw power of the Primaris crewed strike craft to execute maneuvers they had considered impossible. The pirates were not just defeated, they were annihilated, and a vital supply route to a dozen starving worlds was reopened. The most potent display of this new power came during the liberation of the shrine world of Pramanix. A great unclean one, a favored greater demon of Nurgle, had taken root in the planet's primary basilica, turning it into a garden of fetid corruption. Legions of plague zombies and gibbering Nurglings swarmed the holy districts. Guilliman led the assault personally. While his ultramarines carved a path through the diseased hordes, squads of Primaris Hellblasters took up positions on the ruined balconies of the cathedral. On the Primarch's command, they unleashed a coordinated volley of plasma incinerators. The torrent of artificial suns struck the great unclean one, turning its blighted flesh to superheated steam and foul-smelling ash. The psychic shockwave of its banishment broke the back of the demonic incursion, and the world was saved. Victory followed victory. A tide of Imperial might pushed back the encroaching darkness. Worlds that had been broadcasting desperate pleas for help for years were suddenly and miraculously saved. The news carried by newly secured astropathic relays spread like wildfire. A myth was being born across the segmentum solar. The avenging sun had returned. The Primarch was alive. Hope, once a forgotten luxury, was now a roaring fire in the hearts of 1 trillion citizens. This fire was on full display when Guilliman made his triumphal entry into the capital city of Pramanix after its cleansing. The streets were thronged with a sea of humanity, their faces gaunt from starvation and fear now streaked with tears of joy. They threw sanctified flower petals before his feet and chanted his name in a rhythmic, hypnotic dirge of worship. Guilliman, Guilliman, the Son, the Savior. He walked through them, his azure armor a beacon of order amidst the chaos of adulation, and he felt a profound and chilling sickness in his soul. Priests of the Ministorum, their vestments heavy with gold thread and stained with the grime of siege, fell to their knees, holding aloft censers that belched clouds of cloying incense. Sisters of the Adepta Sororitas, their power armor scarred from the recent battle, bowed their heads in fervent prayer, their hands clutching their rosaries. They looked at him, not with the respect due a supreme commander, but with the ecstatic, unquestioning adoration of a zealot before a living god. And he hated it. He hated every moment of it. This was the very poison his father had fought to purge from the soul of humanity. The imperial truth, the bedrock of their great crusade, was built upon reason, logic, and the utter rejection of faith, superstition, and divinity. The Emperor had taught his sons that men should look to themselves for strength, not to ethereal beings in the sky. Yet here, in the supposed moment of his triumph, Guilliman was surrounded by the very disease he had been created to eradicate. The people cheered his name, but they did not see the strategist, the statesman, the builder. They saw a holy icon, an angel of their corpse god, a magical totem to ward off the darkness. He had won the battle for their planet, but he saw with crushing clarity that he was losing the war for their souls. This Imperium was not his Imperium. It was a monstrous, twisted caricature, a theocracy built on the bones of his father's dream. As he ascended the steps of the reclaimed governor's palace, the roar of the crowd at his back, Roboute Guilliman felt the bitter irony. He was their symbol of hope, yes, but the hope they held was for the continuation of the grand, holy lie he so utterly despised. The new dawn cast a long shadow. While the Indomitus Crusade brought hope to the beleaguered masses within the cloistered halls of the Adeptus Astartes and the secret chambers of the Inquisition, the price of this sudden violent progress was being calculated with grim precision. Victory was not without cost, and the coin was paid in blood tradition and trust. The most immediate cost was a physical one paid on the apothecarian slabs of 100 battle barges. The promise of the Primaris warrior was not just for the newly forged, but for the old as well. The procedure known as the Rubicon Primaris offered a chance for veteran firstborn Marines to be remade, to cross the threshold and become something greater. It was a promise of strength, but the path was one of excruciating peril. Marneus Calgar, the venerable chapter, Master of the Ultramarines, was among the first to volunteer. He who had defended Ultramar for centuries would not stand aside while a new generation bore the brunt of the fighting. He lay upon the cold adamantium slab, his ancient power armor stripped away, his scarred body exposed to the unblinking auger lenses of the apothecaries. He felt the sting of the catalepsian inducers, the cold dread of surrendering his formidable will to the hands of others. The procedure was a deconstruction and a rebuilding of a demigod's flesh. His ribcage was surgically broken and refused into a solid interlocking plate of bone. He felt the agonizing stretch as the sinew coil's metallic cables of impossible strength were woven into his muscle tissue. The Magnificat was implanted at the base of his brain, a secondary brain that flooded his system with growth hormones and combat stims, a process that felt like his very soul was being set on fire. The final implant, the Belisarian furnace, was stitched next to his heart's, a radiological kiln that could give him a final burst of life-giving energy, but which pulsed with a constant low-grade poison. He hovered in a red haze of agony, his transhuman fortitude tested to its absolute limit. He survived. When he awoke, he was larger, stronger, his body a miracle of bioengineering. But he would forever carry the phantom pains of his own remaking and the knowledge of those who did not. For every success like Calgar, a dozen other heroes perished on the operating table. Chapter champions, revered captains, heroes of legendary campaigns, their bodies rejected the violent transformation, their physiology collapsing under the strain. The annals of many chapters would record this time not just with glory, but with a list of revered names lost not to the enemy's blade, but to their own side's desperate reach for power. While the Astartes paid in blood, other more subtle powers began to move against the new regime. In a shadowed sanctum deep within the Rock of Terror, Inquisitor Lord Hexarchus, a senior member of the Ordo Hereticus, convened a secret conclave. With him sat the chapter master of the Iron Hands, Cardan Stronos, a leader whose rigid adherence to logic and tradition made him deeply suspicious of radical change. The Primarch's return is a boon, of course. The Inquisitor began his voice a dry whisper. He steepled his slender, augmented fingers. His victories speak for themselves. The tide turns, but the tools he uses, they raise questions that require answers. Stronos, a monolith of black iron and grim countenance, gave a slow, deliberate nod. Belisarius' call, he stated the name A Binary Curse on his Vox emitter, an Archmagos who operated without oversight for 10 millennia. His works are a black box. The Primaris gene seed, he claims it is pure. We have only his word. A word unsanctioned by the high lords of Mars. An anomaly. A dangerous anomaly, Hexarchus agreed. Guilliman has granted him unprecedented resources and autonomy. He has accepted these new warriors without question, integrating them into chapters whose histories stretch back to the founding. He sweeps aside tradition, ignores protocol. His power is absolute, unchecked. He is accountable to no one save the silent throne. The Inquisitor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with suspicion. We of the Holy Ordos are the guardians of the Imperium's soul. We must be vigilant, especially when miracles occur. Unquestioning faith is for the masses, not for us. He slid a data slate across the table. It showed a single sigil, a black shield and spear, the mark of the Death Watch. We cannot act against a Primarch directly, Hexarchus murmured. That would be a civil war we cannot win, but we can investigate his enabler. I want to know everything there is to know about Belisarius' call, his hidden laboratories, his off-the-record dealings, the true source of his inspiration. I am dispatching a kill team, not to assassinate, to observe, to gather data. Stronos looked at the sigil, his mind processing the cold logic of the situation. The risk of discovery is high. The risk of inaction is higher, the Inquisitor countered. If Karl is a heretic and his creations are flawed, then this entire Indomitus crusade is built on a foundation of heresy that could damn us all. We will have our answers, for the good of the Imperium. A quiet secret war had just been declared in the shadows of Guilliman's glorious new dawn. The early victories of the Indomitus crusade were like a powerful medicine surging through the veins of a dying patient. The fever of chaos and Xenos invasions receded in 100 systems. But as the initial crisis abated, Guilliman came to face the chronic, deeply rooted disease that had been sickening the Imperium for 10,000 years. His war was not just against the external foe, but against the very soul of his kingdom. The first and most formidable bastion of this internal decay was the Adeptus Ministorum, the Ecclesiarchy. Guilliman summoned the Ecclesiarch Eos Council to his temporary offices within the Imperial Palace. The chamber was sparse, functional, decorated only with star charts and tactical displays. The Ecclesiarch entered a man whose age was impossible to determine his face, a serene mask beneath a mitre of blinding opulence. He moved with the practiced grace of a man who commanded the faith of a quintillion souls. Lord Regent Council said, his voice smooth and melodic. Your victories are a testament to the God Emperor's divine will. How may his holy church serve you? Guilliman gestured to a chair and offered the Ecclesiarch politely ignored, preferring to stand. The Primarch went straight to the heart of the matter. Your service will be to begin dismantling the grand lie that your organization has perpetuated for 100 centuries. The Emperor of mankind is not a god. He never wished to be. The air in the room grew cold. The Ecclesiarch's serene expression did not falter, but a sudden hard intensity entered his eyes. Lord Regent, you are weary from your long sleep. Perhaps your memory is... My memory is perfect, Guilliman cut in his voice hard as ceramite. I was there. I fought alongside my father. He created an empire of reason, of science. He called it the Imperial Truth. The foundation of that truth was the absolute rejection of superstition, of blind faith, of divinity. He tore down the churches of old Earth with his own hands. You have built a galaxy-spanning cathedral upon his throne, and in doing so, you have betrayed everything he stood for. The Ecclesiarch listened patiently. When Guilliman finished, he gave a slow, sad smile. You speak of a time long past, my lord. A truth for a different age. The Imperial Truth was a tool for conquest for a humanity that was strong and ascendant. For 10 millennia we have not been strong. We have been besieged, terrified, lost in the dark. In that darkness, logic provides no comfort. Science offers no salvation from the daemon's claw. The holy faith in the God Emperor is the sole and vital shield that protects the soul of man. It is the fire that warms them in the cold, the righteous fury that gives them the strength to die for a cause greater than themselves. Your father, in his infinite wisdom, ascended to a new role. He became the deity humanity needed him to be. His divinity is proven by your return. It is proven by the light of the Astronomicon. It is proven every time a sister of battle stands firm against a creature of the warp through prayer alone. Through delusion, Guilliman counted his frustration growing. You celebrate ignorance. You burn knowledge that contradicts your dogma. You have turned humanity into a cowering, superstitious mob that prays to a corpse. We have given them hope, the ecclesiarch replied, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. You seek to take that away. To what end? To replace it with the cold, empty truth that the galaxy is a place of horrors and that they are alone. That truth, Lord Regent, would shatter the Imperium in a single day. Faith is the mortar that binds the bricks of this empire. Without it, all is dust. Guilliman stared at the man, seeing not a corrupt cynic, but something far more dangerous, a true believer. He realized he was not arguing with a man, but with 10,000 years of history. He could execute counsel, but 100 more just like him would take his place. He had hit a wall of faith, an edifice of belief so colossal that his truth bounced off it like a pebble. His understanding deepened on the world of St. Augusta's Vale during the final push against a word-bearer's warband. From the command deck of the Macragger's Honor, he watched the tide of battle on the hololiths. He saw regiments of Vostroyan firstborns, their lines wavering under the psychic assault of chaos sorcerers. Then the Ministorum priests at their front lines raised their blazing Crozius staves. Their voices, amplified by voxcasters, shrieked litanies of hatred and faith. The guardsman's fear was burned away, replaced by a self-destructive, fanatical fury. They surged forward in a bayonet charge, chanting prayers as they threw themselves onto the chain swords of the traitor Marines. It was a massacre, a horrifying, wasteful, brutal massacre. But it worked. The sheer weight of their bodies clogged the enemy's guns, swamping the traitors in a tide of flesh that allowed more specialized units to strike the final blow. Later, he watched a squad of Adepta Sororitas cleanse the corrupted cathedral. They walked through shimmering curtains of warp fire, their hymns a shield against the immaterial energies. Their faith was a palpable weapon, a force of psychic denial that unraveled the sorcery of their foes. They were magnificent, terrifying, and the absolute embodiment of everything he stood against. He saw the power of their belief, and he was disgusted by it. It was a tool, yes, a potent one, but it was a tool that demanded the sacrifice of reason, of strategy, of the very minds of the soldiers who wielded it. That night, in the silent solitude of his scriptorium, Guilliman conceded his first great defeat. He could not destroy the ecclesiarchy. To do so would be to destroy his own war machine. He could not restore the imperial truth. The lie was too powerful, too useful. He was trapped. With a heavy heart and a feeling of profound self-loathing, he pulled up a copy of the Lectitio Divinitatus, the foundational text of the Imperial Creed. For a long moment he considered ordering every copy in the galaxy to be burned. A fantasy. Instead, his fingers hovered over the console. He would not erase their lies. If he could not beat them, he would have to join them. He began to compose a new appendix, a new book to be added to their holy canon, the Codex Imperialis. In it, he did not refute the divinity of his father. Instead, he codified his own role within their mythology. He was the regent, the avenging son, the living voice of the silent emperor. His words were the emperor's words. His laws were the emperor's laws. It was a bitter, pragmatic compromise. He was legitimizing the lie, embedding himself within it, hoping to steer the ship of state from within its corrupted heart. He was no longer fighting for the truth. He was fighting for control of the narrative. And in that moment, a part of the idealistic Primarch who had awakened on Macraga died forever. Having been forced into a bitter compromise with the ecclesiarchy, Guilliman turned his formidable attention to the other great pillar of the Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus. If faith was the spirit of his new crusade, the priesthood of Mars was its backbone of steel. He expected to find a bastion of logic and production, a creed he could understand if not fully endorse. Instead, he found another religion, one of dogma and ritual, that was in its own way as maddeningly obstructive as the imperial cult. His frustrations began in his discussions with Belisarius Coll. Aboard the Zarquesator, the ever-active Archmagos presented Guilliman with schematics for a dozen new war machines. There were new patterns of battle tank utilizing grav-repulsor technology, not widely seen since the days of the Legionaries Astartes. There were plans for enhanced weapon systems, more efficient plasma reactors, even experimental alloys that could rival the auramite of the Custodes. The potential is limitless. Lord Regent Coll's synthesized voice buzzed with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic. The Primaris Marine is but the first step. With the resources you have granted me, I can re-equip your entire crusade. We can give your soldiers the tools to win this war, not merely survive it. Guilliman studied the designs, his strategic mind immediately seeing their value. This is what the Imperium needs, Coll. Innovation, superiority. Why has this not been done before? Why are our armies still equipped with technology that has barely changed in 10,000 years? A sound that might have been a sigh of static hissed from Karl's vocoder. Because, Lord Primarch, my colleagues on Mars are not inventors. They are priests. They do not see a machine as a tool to be improved, but as a holy relic whose spirit must be appeased. They spend centuries arguing over the correct number of sacred oils to anoint a Land Raider's engine, while the machine itself slowly degrades. They declare any deviation from a known standard template construct to be heresy. They would rather pray to a failing generator than risk the sin of trying to understand and repair it. The Fabricator General and his conclave see me not as a savior, but as a heretic of the highest order. Guilliman was to witness the truth of Karl's words firsthand. His crusade required vast amounts of ammunition, armor, plating, and replacement parts. To expedite this, he diverted his fleet to the nearby forge world of Velcanos Magna, a planet that was, according to Administratum records, supposed to be producing a tithe of war materiel for the entire sector. He arrived to find a world that was eerily silent. The great continent-spanning manufactorums were still their smokestacks cold against the grey sky. In the central cogitator sanctum, Guilliman towered over the ruling Archmagos, a wizened creature of rusting metal and flaccid, vat-grown skin. Energy conduits lay dead at their feet. Production tickers were frozen at zero. Explain this. Guilliman demanded, his voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber. Your world has ceased production. You are denying vital supplies to a Lord Commander's crusade. This is treason. The Archmagos responded not with a report, but with a litany of binary cunt. Plusps query treason invalid. Action appeasement, status ongoing. The great omniscient engine, blessed be its workings, has entered a state of slumber. Spirit is restful. Pluspa. Guilliman pointed a gauntleted finger at a colossal, dark machine at the far end of the sanctum, the primary plasma forge that powered the entire planet. That machine is not slumbering. Guilliman grated his patience, wearing thin. It is broken. Why have you not repaired it? Plus repair is a profanity against the machine's divine will. Plus, the Archmagos canted, horrified. The rites of awakening have been initiated. For 5 solar cycles we have chanted the litany of reignition. We have anointed its sacred casing with the oils of Mars. We have struck its rune plates with the blessed hammers of percussion. The machine spirit has not yet deigned to respond. To open its sacred workings without its consent would be the gravest heresy. The knowledge is forbidden. Guilliman felt a surge of cold, logical fury that was almost overwhelming. This was insanity. A forge world, the heart of imperial industry, was paralyzed by superstition. An entire war effort was being jeopardized because these robed fools would rather perform a rain dance than pick up a wrench. This single event crystallized the problem for him. The Imperium was not just fighting chaos. It was fighting a civil war against its own institutionalized stupidity. He made his decision then and there. Bypassing the local priesthood entirely, he had his own tech marines and a contingent from Cowl's fleet storm the Plasma Forge. They ignored the horrified shrieks of the Velchanos tech priests cut through the ritual locks, and within hours had diagnosed the simple fault, a fractured plasma conduit that had been leaking for decades. The part was replaced. The forge was reignited. The planet shuddered back to life. He had restored production, but he had also violated the sacred laws of the Mechanicus on one of their own worlds. The political fallout was immediate. The Fabricator General of Mars himself, Kelba Hull's successor, demanded an audience. The hololithic communication was tense, the Martian leader, a static-wreathed avatar of dogmatic intransigence. He spoke of blasphemy of the violation of sacred mysteries and threatened to cut off all support from the Forge worlds loyal to Mars. Guilliman, however, now understood the game. He could not fight this religion head-on any more than he could the ecclesiarchies. He had to subvert it. "Your traditions are respected," Fabricator General Guilliman said, his tone one of cold, hard negotiation. "But my Crusade's needs are paramount. Belisarius Cawl and his methods are now under my direct authority and protection. He represents a new order of thinking, one vital to our survival." "He is a schismatic," the Fabricator General crackled. "His works are unsanctioned." "Then I will sanction them," Guilliman declared. "In my capacity as Imperial Regent, I am formally recognizing Cawl and his followers as the Primus Conclave of Innovation. Furthermore, I am granting him exclusive access to the Archaeotech data vaults recovered from the Speranza. He will have the resources and the authority to pursue his work, with or without your blessing." It was a masterful, brutal political stroke. He was offering the wider Mechanicus a choice: join him in this new era of progress, or be left behind watching as Cawl and his faction reaped the rewards of all the new miraculous technology. The Fabricator General's hololith flickered in silent rage for a long moment. The desire for lost technology was the one thing that could override even the most entrenched dogma. "We will consider your proposal," the Martian leader eventually ground out. The connection was cut. Guilliman had won. The flow of weapons and ammunition for his crusade was secured. But he had paid a steep price. He had taken the existing cracks within the Adeptus Mechanicus and driven a wedge into them. He had created a cult of personality around Cawl, setting him up as a rival to the authority of Mars. He had purchased short-term production at the cost of long-term unity, planting the seeds of a technological schism that could one day tear the priesthood of Mars and the Imperium apart. It was another necessary compromise, another stain on the dream he fought for. Having confronted the zealotry of faith and the superstitions of technology, Roboute Guilliman believed he might at last find some semblance of logic, however cold and unfeeling, in the vast administrative machinery of the Imperium, the Adeptus Administratum. He was mistaken. He found not logic but a self-perpetuating labyrinth of inertia, a paperwork hydra, where for every head he severed, two more infinitely more complex and useless grew in its place. His attempt at reform began with a simple matter of logistics. During the campaign to secure the eastern fringe of the Segmentum Solar, his crusade fleet was in dire need of bolter shell replenishments and replacement parts for Lehman Russ tanks. The requisition, encoded with the highest priority of a Lord Commander, was sent to the nearest designated supply world, Etruria 7th. Weeks passed. Nothing arrived. Battlefield reports grew desperate. Astartes squads were forced to conserve rounds. Cadian regiments had to resort to costly bayonet charges because their armor sat inert and useless. Infuriated, Guilliman resolved to trace the source of the delay himself. He did not send an aide or a scribe. He wanted to see the beast that was crippling his empire with his own eyes. He followed the requisition's data trail to the Central Administratum Spire on Etruria 7th itself, a miles-high pyramid of plasteel and rockcrete, where millions of scribes toiled in the dim glow of lumen globes. His journey into the depths of the bureaucracy was a surreal nightmare. He saw corridors lined with floor-to-ceiling stacks of parchment scrolls that had petrified with age. He saw scribes who had died at their desks, quills still in hand, only for others to simply take their place and continue the work as if nothing had happened. He witnessed entire departments whose functions were completely redundant, often sending contradictory orders to one another, creating an endless, self-generating loop of work. Finally, after hours, he found his requisition. It was on the desk of a mid-level prefect named Plexo, a thin, stooped man with implanted optical magnifiers and skin the color of grey parchment. The request, a data slate bearing the seal of the Imperial Regent himself, was pinned beneath a towering stack of flimsy plast. This request, Guilliman said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, was filed 3 weeks ago. Why has it not been actioned? Prefect Plexo blinked, showing no fear or urgency, only the profound weariness of a man who has been doing his job for too long. My lord, he droned in a monotone, the request is lacking the accompanying military necessity confirmation form 99 Gamma. Without said form, I cannot pass it to the Department of Resource Allocation Sanctioning. To do so would be a violation of Administrative Edict 1138 subsection Delta. Guilliman felt a migraine beginning to pulse behind his temples. I am the Lord Commander of the Imperium. My request is the confirmation. With all due respect, my Lord, Plexo replied, the process is the process. The system exists to ensure order. To bypass one step is to invite chaos. Your requisition has been placed in the pending queue, while a formal request for Form 99 Gamma has been dispatched to your own administrative hours. We estimate a response within 8 to 10 standard solar cycles. In that moment, Guilliman understood. The enemy was not Plexo. The man was not evil or a saboteur. He was a single perfectly functioning cog in a vast, unthinking machine. The enemy was the machine itself. A system created to manage an empire now existed only to perpetuate its own existence. Efficiency had been sacrificed for compliance. Logic had been replaced by procedure. Returning to his flagship, Guilliman embarked on one of his most ambitious tasks. He would reform the administratum. He spent months drafting a new body of law, a streamlined system he called the Codex Imperialis. It was designed to eliminate redundant protocols, clarify chains of command, and empower local commanders to make decisions without waiting for approval from Terra. It was a masterpiece of administrative logic, a blueprint to transform a stagnant beast into an efficient war machine. He had, however, fatally underestimated the Hydra's resistance to change. When his edicts were disseminated, they were met not with open rebellion, but with something far more insidious and effective interpretation. High-ranking bureaucrats, fearing his reforms would diminish their power, and Station did not refuse his orders. Instead, they added to them. They created new reform oversight committees to ensure the Regent's directives were properly implemented. They wrote thousands of pages of clarifying addenda burying Guilliman's original, clean intent under mountains of obfuscating jargon. A simple order, like planetary commanders are authorized to requisition local resources during a defense emergency, was twisted into a 12-step process that required the filling out of new forms consultation with 3 different sub-officers and final approval from a committee half a galaxy away. The end result was that the new system designed for speed was even slower, more bureaucratic, and less efficient than the one it replaced. Guilliman's attempt to streamline the machine had inadvertently created more layers of complexity. He had cut off one of the Hydra's heads, and in its place, it had grown 3 more, each one wielding a new rubber stamp and a fresh stack of paperwork. He realized with a sense of grim despair that he could not win this war by decree. To truly reform the administratum, he would have to personally replace every single corrupt and myopic official, a task that would take 1,000 years. He could only patch the cracks, impose his will on a case-by-case basis, but he could not fix the rot at the system's core. The Hydra would always be there, choking the life from the Imperium with its own dead weight. The walls of faith and bureaucracy were formidable, but they were external obstacles, problems of system and scale that Guilliman could, in theory, solve with enough time and force. A far deeper and more insidious prison was the one he carried within himself, the 10,000-year-old wound of the Horus heresy. The Imperium was not just haunted by the actions of the traitor legions. Guilliman was haunted by the memory of his fallen brothers. They were not simply enemies, they were his personal failures cast in immortal, monstrous form. This bitter legacy was given a face and a voice in the verdant, now rotting heart of his own kingdom. The Plague Wars saw the realm of Ultramar itself invaded by the Death Guard, led by the demon Primarch Mortarion in person. The war was a brutal, grinding conflict that turned the garden worlds of the 500 worlds into Nurgle's fetid playgrounds. On the blighted plains of the plague-bombed agri-world of Ajax Guilliman finally met his brother in battle. Mortarion was a horror. A colossal, bloated figure in corroded ceramite, his hunched form draped in chains and filth-encrusted robes. A miasma of death and disease rolled off him, and the constant drone of a billion plague flies filled the air around him. He wielded a vast, rusted scythe silence, and moved with a ponderous, inexorable grace. As Guilliman engaged him, the Emperor's sword blazing with a cleansing fire, it became clear that this was not just a battle of strength, but a war of ideology. Brother Mortarion's voice gurgled from behind his rebreather, a sound like a drowning man speaking through a bog. "You have come to tend my new garden. Do you like what I have done with the place? It is so full of life. So resilient." "You have brought nothing but death and misery," Slave Guilliman snarled, parrying a sweeping blow from the great scythe. "Death, misery," Mortarion chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "No, I bring truth. I bring inevitability. Everything rots, Roboute. Everything crumbles. The grandest star, the proudest empire. It all falls to entropy. Grandfather Nurgle does not cause this. He merely embraces it. He is the god of life, of the endless churning cycle of decay and rebirth. Look around you." He swept a hand at the corrupted landscape. "Is this so different from your Imperium? You rule a corpse. You polish its bones and pretend it still breathes. Your people fester in hive cities, drowning in their own waste, their souls rotting with fear and superstition. You are the lord of a dying empire. I am the lord of a thriving one. The only difference between us is that I am honest about it." Every word was a poisoned dart, aimed not at Guilliman's armor, but at his soul. Mortarion's arguments were a grotesque parody of the truth Guilliman had been forced to confront every single day since his awakening. The Imperium was rotting. It was built on a lie. He was fighting with every fiber of his being to hold back the tide of decay, and here was his own brother, a demigod of that very same decay, mocking his efforts as a futile, childish fantasy. "Our father fought for something better," Guilliman retorted, his voice strained. "For a future of reason and strength. Our father is a deluded tyrant on a golden rack powering the very superstition he claimed to despise." Mortarion roared, his casual mockery falling away to reveal a deep, bitter anger. "He made us as his disposable tools of conquest, then demanded we love him for it. I serve a master who is generous, who gives gifts, who loves all life even in its most septic forms. You serve a memory, a lie. You are the last sane man in a galaxy-wide asylum, and you think that makes you a king. It only makes you the chief inmate." The weight of that confrontation settled deep in Guilliman's spirit long after he had driven Mortarion from the field in a Pyrrhic victory. It followed him back to the cold silence of his chambers aboard the Macragge's Honor. Sleep for a Primarch was a conscious act of shutting down biological processes, a state of restorative trance. But it offered no escape, for in the quiet of his own mind, the ghosts of all his other failures were waiting. He dreamt, not of Nurgle's garden, but of the pristine marble of a bygone age splattered with the blood of his own sons. He was back on Calth, the sky turning to fire as Lorgar's betrayal was revealed. He saw the maddeningly pious certainty in his brother's eyes as he unleashed the warp upon a compliant world. The dream shifted. He was on the deck of the Pride of the Emperor, facing Fulgrim, beautiful and terrible, the lyre blade in his hand. He felt the phantom sting of the poison in his neck, the shock of being laid low by a brother he had once campaigned beside. The final, most terrible vision was of Horus. Not the twisted, warp-infused arch-traitor, but Horus Lupercal, the war master, his most beloved brother, laughing with him on the fields of Ulanor. He saw the moment the news of Istvan V had reached him, the crushing, sickening disbelief that his brother, the brightest of them all, could fall so far. He felt the old, agonizing question rise again, a question that had plagued him for 10 millennia in his stasis shrine. Why did I not see it? Why was I not there? I was building my own little empire in Ultramar while the galaxy burned. I failed him. I failed them all. He awoke with a jolt, his twin hearts hammering against his ribs. The systems of the armor of fate whirred, injecting soothing balms into his bloodstream to counteract his sudden distress. He sat up on the cold, slab-like bed, alone in the darkness of his quarters. Mortarion Angron Fulgrim Lorga. They were not just strategic opponents. They were the walking, screaming embodiment of his own past, a legacy of betrayal that time could not heal. Every war against them was not just a battle for the Imperium, but an agonizing penance for a failure he could never undo. The legacy of betrayal left Guilliman emotionally scarred, but the challenges to his crusade were not confined to the ghosts of the past. The very tools he had created to forge a new future were becoming a source of bitter division. The introduction of the Primaris Marines was intended to be a reinforcement, a gift of new strength to the beleaguered chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. But in an institution steeped in 10,000 years of tradition, history and ritual, such a radical change was not a gift, but a schism. A wedge was being driven between brothers, sundering the sacred bonds of the chapters. This growing rift was made starkly clear when Guilliman's emissary, a tetrarch of Ultramar, arrived at the fortress monastery of the Vindicators, a proud and notoriously stubborn successor chapter of the Imperial Fists. Their chapter master Mordecai was a warrior carved from granite, a veteran of 1,000 battles whose lineage within the chapter stretched back 5 millennia. He met the Tetrarch in the Hall of Heroes, a vast chamber where the names of every Vindicator ever to fall in battle were inscribed upon the obsidian walls. Before him stood a cohort of Primaris Grey Shields, their armor pristine, their bearing perfect, waiting to be integrated into the chapter's ranks. Mordecai circled the new arrivals, his gaze contemptuous. "You bring me these facsimiles," he rumbled, his voice like grinding rock, "and you call them my brothers." "They bear the pure gene seed of Dawn Lord Mordecai," the Tetrarch replied calmly. "They are your kin forged to fight in this dark new age. The Lord Regent himself sends them to give your chapter the strength it needs to endure." Strength, Mordecai scoffed, stopping before a towering Primaris warrior. "This chapter's strength is not in the density of its muscle or the efficiency of its armor. It is here." He slammed a gauntleted fist against the wall, rattling the honorific plaques. "It is in the memory of these names. It is in the trials of our aspirants, in the rituals of our reclusium, in the shared blood and pain of centuries of service. These constructs of call, they have no history. They have not bled on our worlds. They have not wept for our dead. They are strangers wearing our heraldry. To accept them is to say that the legacy for which all these heroes died was flawed, that their sacrifice was not enough. It is an insult." The Tetrarch's face hardened. "The alternative chapter master is extinction. Your roles are thin. The enemies of man are at the gate. This is not a request. It is the will of the Primarch." A tense silence filled the hall. Mordecai stared at the Primaris Marines, his jaw tight with resentment. He saw not reinforcements, but a dilution of his chapter's very soul. Finally, with a gesture of disgust, he relented. They will be assigned to the 10th Company as initiates. Let us see if they can earn the name Vindicator, or if they break like all of Carl's other untested toys. The seeds of tragedy had been sown. The bitter fruit of that division was harvested months later in the ash-choked streets of the hive city of Vax Primus during a brutal campaign to oust an Iron Warriors warband. The final objective was the heretic's citadel, the Iron Bastion, a fortress bristling with autocannons and warp-infused defenses. The Vindicator's attack plan was a classic hammer and anvil. The chapter's revered First Company, clad in Terminator armor, would teleport directly into the Citadel's command spire, the Hammer. Simultaneously, the newly formed Primaris companies, including a spearhead of heavy aggressors, would provide a massive frontal assault to pin the defenders and draw their fire, the Anvil. Success depended entirely on perfect timing and absolute trust. The battle began. The Primaris forces advanced under a blistering hail of fire, their bolt rifles and auto-bolt storm gauntlets chewing through the traitor lines. They were efficient, powerful, and relentless, a wave of blue and gold ceramite pushing through the rubble. They reached their designated perimeter and established firing positions, their guns trained on the bastion's walls, waiting for the teleport flare that would signal the First Company's arrival. The flare never came. Aboard his command, Rhino Chapter Master Mordecai watched the hololith, his heart filled with a bitter, corrosive doubt. He saw the sheer power of the Primaris advance, and a part of him resented it. They made it look too easy. He feared a trap. What if the traitors were letting them advance only to encircle them? What if these new warriors, lacking true grit, broke and fled, leaving his precious Terminators isolated and doomed? He hesitated. Hold the teleport signal, he commanded the Lexicanum. Let the initiates prove their mettle first. Let them soften the target. It was a fatal decision. On the ground, the Primaris captains, seeing their objective reached, could not understand the delay. The Iron Warriors, realizing they were not facing a coordinated two-pronged assault, reacted with brutal efficiency. They redeployed their reserves, ignoring the suppressing fire, and turning the full might of the Bastion's guns onto the exposed Primaris positions. Mortar shells rained down. Lascannons turned aggressors into molten slag. The advance stalled, then became a desperate struggle for survival. Seeing the initiates being cut to pieces, Mordecai finally gave the order. Strike now, for the Emperor and Dawn. The Terminators of the First Company teleported in, arriving not into a confused and distracted enemy force, but into a fully alerted bastion that was waiting for them. Their teleport homer bloomed in the middle of a prepared kill zone. Heavy bolters and autocannons opened up from all sides. The hammer fell not on the anvil, but into a waiting furnace. The assault was a catastrophe. The Vindicators were forced to retreat, leaving the Iron Bastion standing, and worse, leaving behind the bodies of dozens of their brothers, both Firstborn and Primaris. In the aftermath, Guilliman himself reviewed the mission logs from his chambers on the Macragge's honor. He read the transcripts, the casualty reports, the quiet, damning evidence of hesitation and mistrust. He had given his sons a superior weapon in the Primaris Marine, but in his haste he had failed to account for the pride, fear, and traditions of the warrior soul. He had created a schism in his own house, and the blood of Vindicators, new and old, was the price. The failure was not Mordecai's alone, it was his. Guilliman's war against the Imperium's internal decay was a grinding, frustrating affair. He fought against the immovable walls of dogma, bureaucracy, and ingrained tradition. Yet all these terrestrial struggles were dwarfed by a single intractable reality that mocked his every effort. His greatest enemy was not a recalcitrant priest or a traitorous war master, but a feature of the map itself. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, was a permanent suppurating wound in the fabric of existence, and it had cleaved the Imperium in two. In the grand strategium of the Macragge's honor, the Primarch would stand for hours before the vast hololithic map of the galaxy. On one side, the Segmentum Solar Pacificus and Tempestus glowed with the interconnected webs of established warp routes and astropathic relays. This was Imperium Sanctus. Here his Indomitus crusade could bring force to bear, reclaim worlds, and re-establish a semblance of order. But the other half of the map, a swathe of territory that encompassed the entirety of Segmentum Obscurus and the northern half of Ultima Segmentum, was a dark, roiling mess. This was Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, and from this realm of shadow only whispers and screams ever escaped. The reports that managed to cross the turbulent barrier were rare, fragmented, and universally dire. He would listen to the agonized, static-laced testimonies of souls trapped in a godless night. One flickering astropathic projection showed the face of a planetary governor, his features skeletal with famine and terror. The light. The Emperor's light is gone, the ghost whispered its message already centuries out of date. The demons walk in the noonday sun. Time is broken. Last week the crops aged, withered, and died in an hour. Yesterday the sun rose in the west. We have had no word from our sector fleet in a generation. We are alone. Does anyone hear us? Is the Imperium still there? Another report was a data burst from the Crimson Castellans, a Space Marine chapter trapped deep within the Nihilus. Their chapter master spoke in a flat, exhausted voice, describing a war that had devolved into pure survival. We have abandoned the outer systems. Our fortress monastery is lost. We operate now as a fleet-based remnant striking from the void to save whom we can. But for every world we aid, 10 more fall. The ruinous powers are not merely invading, they are claiming this realm as their own. Entire star systems have been subsumed into the warp, becoming extensions of their masters' domains. We are no longer soldiers. We are scavengers picking at the bones of a dead empire. Guilliman felt a cold, strategic despair settle upon him. All his work, his reforms, his victories, they were confined to one half of a sundered empire. For every world he saved in the south, another was being damned in the north. He was the regent of half a kingdom. The other half was a lost continent, slowly being digested by the horrors of the warp, its trillions of souls beyond his reach, beyond his ability to save. His crusade was not a war of reclamation. It was a desperate attempt to shore up one wall of a house, while the other half had already collapsed into a chasm. The very nature of this new reality was demonstrated in the most brutal fashion with the loss of Crusade Fleet Tertius. It was one of 10 great fleets tasked with pushing a salient of light and order into the systems bordering the rift. Commanded by the respected chapter master of the Scythes of the Emperor, a newly reconstituted Primaris, Chapter the Fleet was a formidable force of over 100 warships. Their mission was to navigate a supposedly stable warp lane, the Pylos Traverse, and bring relief to the besieged forge world of Ryza. On the bridge of the fleet's flagship, the Vow of Adamant, all was proceeding according to plan. The view through the Geller Field-protected observation ports showed the usual chaotic yet navigable currents of the Empyrean. Then came the screams. A wave of psychic agony washed over the bridge. Every astropath in the ship's choir either died instantly or was driven irrevocably insane. The navigator sanctum fell silent as the navigators themselves were blinded, their third eyes seared shut by a vision of pure malevolent intellect. The ship's Geller field began to flicker, violently groaning under an impossible pressure. The captain stared at the forward view screen in horror. The Pylos Traverse was gone. The relatively calm channel of warp space ahead was not collapsing into random turbulence. It was being actively consumed. A vortex of violent purple and bile green energy, filled with what looked like screaming stellar-sized faces, was closing in on them with the speed and purpose of a hunting predator. This was not a storm. It was an ambush. Helm evasive action. Bring us back to real space now. The chapter master roared. But it was too late. The malevolent storm was upon them. Alarms blared across the bridge. Losing contact with the rear echelon cruisers, a communications officer cried out. Their warp signatures just vanished. Another officer pointed a trembling finger at the view screen. My lord, The storm, it has eyes. The last thing the Vow of Adamant transmitted was a single garbled vox capture of the chapter master's final order, buried in a squall of psychic static. The report that eventually reached Guilliman was compiled from the testimony of a handful of battered frigates that were thrown clear of the disaster. Crusade fleet Tertius had been annihilated, not by an enemy fleet, but by the warp itself. Guilliman stood before his galactic map, extinguishing the icon for the lost fleet. He finally and truly understood. The old rules were gone. The very medium of interstellar travel, the foundation upon which the Imperium was built, was no longer a neutral, if dangerous, environment. It had become a conscious, hostile entity. His strategies, his logistics, his entire understanding of galactic warfare were based on a universe that no longer existed. He was not just fighting a war on a new front. He was fighting a war in which the battlefield itself had become his enemy. As Guilliman wrestled with the grim reality of the Great Rift, a new variable was cast onto the galactic chessboard. It was a piece long thought lost a king from a forgotten age. From the demon-haunted forests of the Dark Imperium, another son of the Emperor returned to the fold. Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels, the First Legion, was awake. The news came not through official channels, but as a series of confused, unbelievable reports of a spectral nightly figure cutting a swathe through traitor warbands of a lost Primarch, appearing from nowhere to turn the tide of a hopeless battle. The reunion, when it finally happened, was not one of tearful brotherly relief. It was a meeting of two weathered monarchs from different competing empires. Guilliman arranged the meeting in a neutral, sterile strategium aboard the orbital plate above Terra, a room stripped of all iconography save for a single vast imperial aquila. The Lion arrived with little fanfare. He was not the pristine, uniformed General Guilliman remembered from the Great Crusade. He looked older, his features hardened by a solitude Guilliman could not comprehend. His black armor was scarred and unadorned, his long hair was wilder, and his eyes held the unnerving, predatory calm of a creature that has spent too long hunting in the dark. He was accompanied by a handful of grim-faced, risen, loyal knights from the heresy era, their presence a quiet accusation against the current state of the Imperium. Brother Guilliman greeted his voice carefully neutral. Brother the Lion returned his voice, a low, gravelly sound, like stones grinding together. His eyes swept the room, missing nothing, trusting nothing. There was no embrace, only a long, heavy silence, as two demigods took the measure of one another after 10,000 years of separation. The Lion spoke first. I awakened to find our father's house in ruins. It is filled with the stench of incense and fear. Priests and paper pushers rule in his stead. And you, Roboute, he fixed his gaze on Guilliman. I find you sitting at the head of this decay, playing the part of Emperor. The accusation was blunt, a verbal dagger. Guilliman felt a flash of anger, but suppressed it. I am holding our father's house together, Lion. While you slept, I have been fighting a war against the galaxy. I have been trying to save an empire that is actively trying to kill itself with its own ignorance and corruption. A reality you seem to have conveniently bypassed while you were on your long hunt. I was not idle, the Lion snapped. I hunted our true enemies, the traitors, the demons. I did not engage in diplomacy with them. I did not attempt to reform their blasphemous institutions. I put them to the sword. It is a simple, effective solution you seem to have forgotten. And you were always the headsman, Guilliman retorted, the old friction between them sparking anew. You see only the nail, and your hammer is your only tool. I am dealing with a failing edifice of 1,000,000 worlds, trillions of souls, and a dozen institutions all vying for power. Blade work alone will not save us. It requires statecraft. It requires logistics. It requires order. This is not order. The Lion said, gesturing vaguely as if to encompass all of terror below them. This is a gilded cage filled with carrion crows. I have seen the truth of things in the darkness of the Nihilus. There is only the hunt and the kill. Purity is restored through fire, not through ink. Their fundamental opposition was laid bare, When Guilliman showed the Lion the grand hololithic map of the Imperium, a swirling miasma of threat icons and desperate battlefronts, the Lion's focus was immediate and absolute. He pointed to the skull rune that marked the approximate location of Angron and the World Eater's fleet. This is a cancer, a direct threat from a brother we know. We marshal the might of the Astartes, your new creations, and my own unforgiven, and we hunt him. We find him, we kill him, and we burn every world that gave him succor. We cut out the heart of the serpent. Guilliman shook his head, a gesture of profound weariness. And while our main battle fleets are engaged on your hunt half a galaxy away, what happens when Abaddon pushes through the Cadian Gate? What happens when the orcs on Armageddon break containment? What happens when a new hive fleet appears from the void? Lion, you see a single battle. I see the entire war. To commit our greatest strength to a single vendetta, however justified, is to leave a dozen other vital fronts undefended. War is not a duel. It is 1,000 interconnected equations of supply, reinforcement, and political will. The Lion looked from the map to Guilliman, his eyes cold with disdain. Politics? Committees? Equations? This is what has brought us to ruin. Our father's house does not need a new set of rules. It needs a purge. You may be the Regent Roboute, but I am the Lion, and I have returned to hunt monsters. If you will not aid me, I will hunt them alone. With that, the meeting was over. Guilliman watched his brother stride from the room, a force of nature, a king in his own right who would not be commanded. He felt no sense of renewed hope, no comfort in a shared burden. He realized with a sinking heart that the Lion's return had not brought him an ally. It had brought him a rival, a wild, unpredictable king who did not understand the fragile, compromised nature of the modern Imperium, and whose simplistic, brutal quest for justice threatened to shatter the delicate balance Guilliman was bleeding himself dry to maintain. His impossible job had just become more so. The abstract grinding wars against institutional decay were a source of profound weariness for Guilliman, but the war against his brother Mortarion was a poisoned dagger aimed at his heart. The Death Lord had brought his master's gifts to the 500 worlds of Ultramar, and the conflict rapidly escalated beyond a mere military campaign into a battle for the very soul of Guilliman's kingdom. This was not a war of territory, but a war of contagion. Mortarion's strategy was one of insidious supernatural corruption. His fleets did not just bombard worlds. They seeded them with plagues that defied all logic and science. These were not mere biological agents, but diseases of the spirit capable of spreading through the warp itself. A world could be disease-free one day, and the next its people would be dying in the streets as their own shadows turned against them, whispering despair. Quarantines failed. Medical protocols were useless. The plagues of Nurgle did not spread via microbes, they spread via hopelessness. From the strategium of the Macrage's honor, Guilliman watched his perfect kingdom rot from within. He received reports from his tetrarchs that the garden world of Eax, the jewel of Ultramar, had become a festering swamp. The agri-world of Parmenio was suffering a blight that turned its golden fields to grey slime. The worst news came from the triplex system, the hive world of Ardium, the forge of Espander, and the shrine of Droll. All three had fallen so deeply into Nurgle's embrace that the very laws of physics were beginning to fray. The infection was spreading a spiritual cancer that threatened to consume all of Ultramar. He was faced with a choice so monstrous it threatened to break his stoic resolve. His logisticians and astropaths confirmed his fears the contagion could not be contained by conventional means. To save the core worlds, including Macrage itself, a firebreak had to be created, a firebreak of absolute death, his face a mask of cold anguish. Roboute Guilliman, the builder, the statesman, the protector of his people, gave the order. Exterminatus, he commanded the battle fleets of Ultramar to turn their guns on their own worlds. Cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs rained down upon the 3 planets of the triplex system. Billions of his own citizen souls he was sworn to protect were sacrificed in atomic fire and biological dissolution. He watched the planetary icons on his hololith wink out, turned from vibrant green to the stark dead red of extermination. He was destroying his own garden to save the roots, and the act felt like a mortal wound to his own soul. This ultimate sacrifice, however, was precisely what Mortarion had been waiting for. Having drawn Guilliman into a final confrontation amid the festering ruins of Ajax, the Demon Primarch revealed his hand. This was not about conquering Ultramar, it was about killing his brother. As their blades met, Mortarion unleashed his master's greatest gift, the God Blight. It was a swirling, sickly storm of entropy, a disease woven from the essence of the plague, God himself, designed with a single purpose to rot the soul of a demigod. It washed over Guilliman, bypassing the armor of fate as if it were mere cloth. The pain was unlike any physical wound. It was a spiritual agony, a sudden crushing weight of utter despair. He felt his transhuman biology begin to fail, his two hearts sputtering his preternatural strength, draining away into a leaden weakness. He felt the ancient poison from Fulgrim's blade, dormant for so long, reawaken with voracious hunger, energized by Nurgle's power. His thoughts became a feverish, chaotic swirl of failure. He saw the worlds he had just destroyed, the faces of his dying citizens. He heard Mortarion's gurgling laughter echoing around him. "It is over, brother," the Death Lord rasped, his monstrous form looming over the fallen Primarch. "The Grandfather claims you. All your planning, all your rules, all your precious order. See how it ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. A slow, gentle rot. As all things should." Guilliman lay dying, his body and soul dissolving into nothing. He felt the finality of it, the cold embrace of the inevitable. And in that last moment, as his consciousness faded, he felt a flicker of something. Not a thought, not a prayer, a connection, a desperate, instinctual reach across the galaxy towards the one source of power he could not explain and did not trust. Father. The response was not that of a loving parent. It was the instantaneous, violent reaction of a weapon system being activated. Across the Imperium, the silent psychic scream of the Emperor on his golden throne focused into a razor point. A beam of pure, golden, wrathful energy lanced through the warp, unseen by any mortal eye, and struck the battlefield of Ajax. It did not feel like salvation. It felt like being set on fire. The golden light was not a gentle, healing warmth. It was the searing, merciless energy of a star. It poured into Guilliman, burning the God Blight from his very essence with excruciating, unimaginable pain. It was a violent exorcism, a scouring of the soul that was as agonizing as the disease itself. For a moment he felt the cold, vast, and utterly alien consciousness of the thing on the throne. There was no love, no recognition, only a terrible commanding will to survive, a power that saw him not as a son, but as a vital and necessary tool that could not be allowed to break. Guilliman screamed, his body arching in a spasm of agony and borrowed power. The God Blight was purged, turned to ash by the Emperor's psychic fire. Mortarion staggered back, howling, not from the light itself, but from the psychic shockwave of its sheer, unadulterated purity and rage. He had brought a plague to a duel, and his father had answered with the fire of a sun. Weakened, his ultimate weapon neutralized, and facing a brother now crackling with the raw power of the Golden Throne, Mortarion was vulnerable. Guilliman rose, his sword blazing with golden light that was not his own. With a final desperate surge of strength, he drove his blade through his brother's corrupted form. It did not kill the Demon Primarch, but it broke his hold on the Imperium. With a final curse, Mortarion's physical body dissolved into a torrent of filth and flies, his spirit banished back into the warp. The battle was over. The plagues receded. Guilliman stood alone on a field of corpses and decay. Ultramar was saved, but it was a victory that tasted of ash. The cost had been astronomical. 3 worlds were dead, billions of his people were gone, and the heart of his kingdom was a ruin. He looked at his hands, feeling the terrifying phantom touch of his father's power. He had won the battle, but only by becoming a conduit for a force he feared and detested. He knew Mortarion would return. The Chaos Gods played a game that could not be won, only endlessly played. He had bought time. That was all. And in the silence of the blasted landscape, that victory felt like the most profound defeat of his life. The victory in Ultramar was the hollowest of his life. Guilliman had saved his people by sacrificing them, and had saved himself through a power he neither controlled nor understood. The intervention of the Emperor during his fight with Mortarion was not a miracle. It was a terrifying revelation. He had been a tool, a weapon remotely activated by an unknowable force. He could not continue to lead, to plan, to rebuild while serving a power whose motives were a mystery. He needed answers. He needed to face the source. He would return to Terra and stand before the Golden Throne once more, not as a supplicant, but as a son demanding a reckoning. His decision was met with grave concern. Captain General Trajan Valoris, the stoic head of the Adeptus Custodes, met with him in the Regent's Solar aboard the orbiting Phalanx. Lord Regent Valoris began, his voice a low bass rumble of pure authority. What you propose is unwise. In 10 millennia, none have stood in the master of mankind's presence for any length of time and remained whole. The psychic power is a crushing, unthinking ocean. It scours the minds of lesser men and has shaken even Primarchs to their core. It could unmake you, my lord. Guilliman looked out at the scarred, smog-wreathed globe of Terra below. That power reached across the galaxy to save me, Captain General. It used me as its sword to strike down my brother. I will not be a puppet, Valoris. Not even for him. I must understand the will behind the power. I must know if there is a mind, a father still there, or if I am merely the servant of a psychic engine. The risk is necessary. The Imperium cannot be led by a blind man. The walk through the Sanctum Imperialis was a journey into absolute silence. The usual hum of the palace's machinery faded away. The air grew cold and heavy with the pressure of a caged god. The final ranks of custodian guard giants in Auramite stood aside, their faces grim. They would go no further. Guilliman stepped into the vast, cavernous throne room alone. He had been here once before upon his first return. Then he had been overwhelmed by grief and shock. Now he came with purpose. He strode to the foot of the golden throne, gazing up at the withered, skeletal figure lost in a web of ancient technology. The psychic scream was a physical force, a hurricane of will that beat against his mind. He knelt not in worship, but to steady himself. And then he opened his mind. He did not speak. He listened. The response was not a voice. It was a deluge, a psychic storm of such magnitude that it threatened to tear his consciousness apart. He was hit with 1 billion conflicting thoughts and images at once. He saw the vast, silent shadow of the hive mind, a hunger so complete it defied comprehension. He saw visions of metallic legions rising from tomb worlds, their cold eyes promising an age of perfect, silent order. He felt the mocking, kaleidoscopic laughter of the harlequin god Segorach, and the cold, rational ambition of a new, rising power, Vashtor, the Archephane, a creature of pure, soulless invention. These were the great enemies, the existential threats, and he felt the Emperor's pure, undiluted hatred for them all. Then came the commands, not in words, but in pure, irresistible waves of intent. They were a mass of contradictions, a god at war with itself. Unite mankind, the will demanded a vision of a unified, powerful humanity striding across the stars. But it was followed immediately by purge the mutant, the weak, the unworthy, a vision of pyres and extermination. Preserve the knowledge of the ancients came a command showing libraries of infinite data, and then burn the heretical text, suffer no innovation. He felt an impulse that could be interpreted as compassion, a desire to shield humanity from the horrors of the void, immediately crushed by a wave of cold, ruthless pragmatism that saw every human life as a mere number in a galactic equation of survival. He searched through the storm, desperately seeking the man he had known. He searched for the architect, the philosopher, the father who had walked with him on Macraga. There was nothing. He saw his father's grand vision, the imperial truth, the Webway project, but he saw them now through the Emperor's eyes, not as a dream for humanity's betterment, but as a cold, strategic plan for galactic domination. He saw the Horus Heresy not as a family tragedy, but as a catastrophic operational failure. He felt the weight of his father's immense, eternal struggle, but he felt no love, no pride, no flicker of paternal recognition. There was only the machine, a vast, powerful, and utterly inhuman intelligence, its personality shattered into 1,000 warring fragments, all held together by a single burning, overriding directive that had become its only remaining truth: humanity must endure. The Imperium must survive, and any price was worth paying. Guilliman pulled his mind back, severing the connection with a gasp that tore at his throat. The psychic storm receded, leaving an echoing silence. He felt empty. He staggered out of the throne room, leaning against the great stone gate. Valoris and the custodes rushed to his side. They saw his face pale as marble, his eyes looking through them as if gazing into a vast and terrible abyss. The change was profound. The son who had walked into the chamber burdened with hope and grief was gone. In his place stood a regent. He looked at the concerned face of the Captain General and finally understood. My father is gone. The Emperor of mankind is dead. What sits on that throne is a psychic weapon, a shield against the darkness, and a terrible necessary engine of war. He did not feel grief. That emotion had been burned out of him by the psychic fire. He felt only a cold, stark clarity. He was no longer a son trying to fulfill his father's dying wish. He was the warden of a dying empire, and its silent, screaming god was not his father to be loved and obeyed, but a tool to be wielded. A tool he would use to hold back the night, no matter the personal cost, no matter how much of his own soul he had to sacrifice to do it. The last of his illusions had been stripped away, leaving only the grim duty of a jailer at the end of time. The revelation in the throne room had not brought Guilliman peace, but a cold, desolate clarity. He was no longer a son seeking to restore his father's dream. He was the sole rational custodian of a galactic asylum, and its most powerful inmate was the very god machine he served. This new grim pragmatism was immediately put to the test. The internal enemies of the Imperium, those who thrived in the shadows of dogma and fear, chose this moment to strike not at Guilliman's armies, but at the very source of his new age of war, Belisarius Cawl. Inquisitor Lord Hexarchus of the Ordo Hereticus, the same man who had initiated the secret investigation into Cawl, requested a private audience. He did not come alone. He was flanked by 2 towering Grey Knight paladins in Terminator armor, their psychic force halberds humming with contained power. Their presence was not for ceremony, it was a statement. This was not a petition. It was an ultimatum. They met in a sterile grey chamber deep within the Imperial Palace. Hexarchus placed a data slate on the table between them. Lord Regent, he began, his voice devoid of warmth, our investigation is complete. The findings are damning. Guilliman activated the slate. It displayed a web of corrupted data codices, algorithmic fragments, that bore a disturbing resemblance to Aeldari linguistic patterns, and a confession extracted from a captured Dark Mechanicum Magos, who claimed to have traded forbidden lore with Cawl centuries ago. The evidence was compelling, expertly compiled and likely fabricated, but that was irrelevant. It was a weapon, and it was now aimed at the heart of the Indomitus Crusade. Belisarius Cawl is a heretic. Hexarchus stated his certainty absolute. His methods are profane, his knowledge sourced from blasphemous origins. The Primaris Marines, the very foundation of your crusade, may be tainted at a genetic level. The holy ordos of the Inquisition, with the full backing of the Fabricator General of Mars and the conclaves of a dozen loyalist Forge worlds, demand that he be surrendered to us for questioning and sanctified purification. We demand a full moratorium on the Primaris project until its purity can be ascertained. It was a perfectly executed political attack. Exarchus had unified the two great pillars of stagnant tradition, the Inquisition, and the conservative elements of the Mechanicus against the one great agent of change. A civil war, then Inquisitor Guilliman, asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That is what you are threatening. You would halt the crusade, ground our fleets, and plunge the Imperium into schism, all while the hosts of chaos are at our very gates. A schism is better than damnation. Lord Regent Exarchus countered, unflinching. To continue down this path is to risk the soul of every Adeptus Astartes chapter, and through them, the soul of the Imperium itself. We are offering you a chance to rectify your oversight, publicly condemn the heretic, restore the traditional bonds with Mars, show the Imperium that no one, not even the architect of its salvation, is above the ancient laws. Refuse, and you will be seen as the protector of a traitor, your own authority irrevocably compromised. After the Inquisitor left, Guilliman sat alone in the grey room for a long time, the data slate glowing on the table before him. The cold logic he had inherited from the Golden Throne took over. He wargamed the scenarios in his mind, stripping them of all emotion, all loyalty, all honor. Option A, defend Call. He could declare the Inquisition's evidence a fabrication and shield the Archmagos with his full authority. The result would be immediate. Exarchus would declare him compromised. The Mechanicus loyal to Mars would cease all production for the Crusade fleets. A significant portion of the Astartes, particularly the conservative chapters, would refuse Primaris reinforcements. The Imperium would fracture. An internal war fought between the forces of tradition and progress would erupt. Meanwhile, Abaddon Mortarion and the Great Devourer would feast on the ruins. The outcome was total collapse. Unacceptable. Option B, sacrifice Call. He could surrender the Archmagos to the Inquisition. Call would be tortured, his mind broken, his body burned. The Primaris project would be halted for centuries, if not forever. The Inquisition and Mechanicus would be appeased. Stability would be maintained. The Crusade, however, would lose its primary source of innovation and its momentum. The Imperium's technological advantage would vanish. It would be a return to the slow, inevitable decline he had been resurrected to prevent. The outcome was a slow death rather than a quick one. Also unacceptable. There had to be a third path, a solution that was not clean, not just, but one that served the ultimate directive: survival. He had found his answer. It was the choice not of a hero, but of a ruler. The choice of a warden. He convened a grand conclave with Exarchus and his entourage on one side, and a hololithic projection of a defiant Belisarius Call on the other. Guilliman sat between them, a figure of absolute cold authority. Your concerns have been heard, Inquisitor Guilliman announced, his voice echoing in the chamber. And your hubris has been noted, Archmagos. He stood. This is my judgment. The Primaris project is the single greatest asset to the survival of the Imperium. It will not be halted. It will be accelerated. The war demands it. A look of triumph flashed across Cowl's projection, while Exarchus stiffened in rage. But Guilliman was not finished. However, he continued, his gaze falling upon Call. The concerns regarding the project's oversight are valid. Archmagos Belisarius Cowl, you are hereby formally censured for unorthodox methods and technological adventurism. Your autonomy is revoked. All of your laboratories, fleets, and forges are now placed under the direct joint oversight of the Adeptus Custodes and a select council of my own choosing. The Inquisition will have observer status. Every new innovation, every line of code, every genetic sequence will be submitted to this council for approval before implementation. You will continue your work, Archmagus, but you will do so on a leash. The chamber was silent. It was a brutal, elegant, and merciless solution. He had given the Inquisition the oversight they demanded, but denied them the purge they craved. He had saved Cole's life and work, but stripped him of his freedom and pride, turning the galaxy's greatest innovator into a high-functioning, monitored prisoner. He had placated the Conservatives without sacrificing his army. No one was happy. Hexarchus was denied his witch-burning, and Cole's genius was now shackled by a committee. But no one could rebel. The system had been preserved. Guilliman had sacrificed a piece of the future, the unbridled, rapid innovation Cole could have provided in order to secure the fragile, violent present. It was the act of a man managing a crisis, not a visionary building a utopia. It was the grim, necessary choice of the Lord Warden of a dying empire. So where does this leave Roboute Guilliman, after all the battles, the bitter compromises, and the terrible truths he has succeeded? By the cold metrics of grand strategy, the Imperial Regent has achieved the impossible. The Indomitus Crusade has pushed back the darkness. Chaos incursions have been halted on 1,000 fronts. Tyrannid hive fleets have been broken. Isolated worlds have been reconnected. The light of the Astronomicon, though still gutted by the Great Rift, now seems to burn a little brighter. Hope, that long-extinct commodity, is now whispered in cathedrals and trenches. The Imperium has been stabilized. But this is not a renaissance. It is the stabilization of a terminal patient. Guilliman has successfully treated the symptoms, but the disease, the deep-seated cancer of decay, remains metastasizing through the very soul of the Empire. He has patched the walls of a crumbling prison, repainted the rusting bars, and reinforced the wardens. He has made the prison more efficient, more secure, but he cannot free the inmates. He has become the chief warden. Consider his victories. To gain the support of his armed forces, he was forced to accept and leverage the Adeptus Ministorum. He has written himself into their holy texts, becoming a demigod in a religion he despises. Priests and battle sisters now fight in his name, their fanaticism a weapon he wields daily, each use further staining the legacy of his father's imperial truth. He has reinforced the fanatical religion. To arm his soldiers, he had to bargain with the Adeptus Mechanicus. He protected its greatest innovator, Belisarius Cael, but at the price of shackling his genius to an oversight committee, turning innovation into a bureaucratic process. He has deepened the schism between the traditionalists and the progressives, planting the seeds of a future technological civil war. He has reinforced the technological superstition. To manage his empire, he attempted to reform the Adeptus Administratum, only to see his efforts consumed by the paperwork hydra and twisted into new layers of complexity. He can rule only by force of will, imposing his authority on a case-by-case basis, but the system itself remains unchanged, a vast inertial machine that continues to choke the life from the Imperium. He has reinforced the bureaucracy. He has brought a new generation of warriors, the Primaris Marines, into being, but has created division and mistrust within the very ranks of the Adeptus Astartes, mankind's greatest defenders. He has introduced a brother, Lion L. Johnson, back into the fray, only to gain a rival power whose ideas of war and justice are fundamentally at odds with his own. Every victory carries with it the seed of a future failure. Every problem solved creates two more. His gilded cage, the office of the Lord Regent, gives him absolute power to command a machine whose fundamental nature he cannot change. He is the most powerful man in the galaxy, trapped in the most hopeless of jobs. And this brings us to the central question, the one that has underpinned every moment since his awakening on Macraga. Can Roboute Guilliman truly save the Imperium? The answer in clear, definitive, and grim-dark finality is no, he cannot. No one can. The Imperium of the 41st Millennium is past the point of salvation. It is too large, too rotten, too ravaged by 10,000 years of war, fear, hatred, and ignorance. Its enemies, chaos, tyrannids, necrons, orcs, are too powerful, too numerous, and are fundamentally concepts that cannot be truly defeated. Victory in the 40K universe is not the destruction of the foe. It is survival to fight another day. To save the Imperium would require changing its core nature. It would mean dismantling the ecclesiarchy and restoring a secular society of reason. But faith is the only glue that keeps a quintillion souls from falling into despair and rebellion. To take it away would be to collapse the Imperium from within. To save the Imperium would mean a complete reformation of the Mechanicus, purging dogma and encouraging true innovation. But that dogma is what prevents tech priests from delving into forbidden technologies that could unleash a second Horus heresy. To save the Imperium would mean dissolving the Administratum and replacing it with an efficient system. But the sheer chaos of such a change would paralyze any and all war efforts for centuries. To save the Imperium, Guilliman would have to tear it down and rebuild it from the ashes. But he cannot. Because while he was tearing it down, the external enemies would pour in and devour what was left. Roboute Guilliman's role is not that of a savior. That is his greatest tragedy. He possesses all the skills, the intellect, and the will to build a perfect galactic empire. But he has been reborn into an age where building is impossible. This age allows for only one action defense. His true role, the one he has grimly accepted after facing the truth on the Golden Throne, is that of the gatekeeper of the apocalypse. He is the warden of a dying empire. His job is not to cure the patient, but to keep the patient alive for one moment longer, to fight the fever, to bandage the weeping wounds, and above all, to make sure the patient does not tear its own throat out in a fit of delirium. He is the last dike holding back an inevitable, inexorable tsunami of darkness. Every day he adds another sandbag, knowing that one day the dike will break, but fighting with all his might, so that day is not this day. He is the most capable man in the galaxy, condemned to the most hopeless task. And that, in the end, is not a story of hope or renaissance. It is a tragedy on a galactic scale, the most fitting, perfect tragedy for the grim, dark universe of Warhammer 40K. The war continues, not to be won, but simply not to be utterly lost. And for a Primarch of the Imperium, that is the only damnation left.